The story began in 1992 when an elderly distant cousin gave me this handwritten copy of a German Jewish family register that had been brought to America in 1941. I didn't speak any German, but this elderly cousin showed me the name Berlesheimer, a name I knew. But then he showed me the name Gundelfinger and the town of Michelbach, nothing. He showed me, I looked at the children, and actually I didn't find my great-grandfather Richard on it at that point. But I will give you a head start and show you that he's Meyer down here. At the top of the page, and of course this is the most important piece of information, he showed me the name of the village of Möhringen, which I still, after all these years, don't pronounce correctly. So those German speakers, apologies for all the German English that I will speak today. Before my husband and I went to Germany so he could study German in a language institute in Frankfurt, I just threw those pages of the handwritten registers into my suitcase. I had assumed, like we all did, that I wouldn't find any information about my ancestors due to the destruction during the Second World War. Well, nevertheless, with a lot of time on my hands, I went to the village of my ancestors. And that's as much of the introduction I will give you, because this project really became an obsession. The area that I researched is in southwest Germany around Stuttgart, south and west of Stuttgart, and a little bit east of Stuttgart. And of course these areas are just a few hours drive south of Frankfurt. I also did research for the other side of the family in Posen and in Bohemia for this side of the family. From the beginning, I knew that I would end my research in the last decades of the 19th century because, as we know, there are so many books written about the 20th century. Today, no Jews live in the village or the other numerous Jewish villages that still dot the countryside. But I could learn about them in the archives. The population of Möhringen that you can still see here in 1830 included about 1,200 people, including 500 Jews. And the arrow is showing you where the synagogue was located, and now there's just a plaque, but that's where it was located in 1830. Of course, I don't know what archives will have, what materials each archive will have relating to your personal search. But for this talk, we're going to assume that you will find every document that we are talking about in every archive. As I said, I did not speak German, and I'm going to assume for this talk that you do not speak German. The idea is I'm going to show you how the documents are set up and how you can search for information about your family. Then you photocopy the documents and you bring them back, and you find an elderly German to do the translations for you. And I had a cadre of my husband's tax clients who translated for me. And you just bring the documents to them, you tape record the sessions, then you put it into your computer. And all they want is thank you. That's what I have found. And you just have to seek out these people. So let's see what we're going to find. The two phrases that I heard over and over again are, I didn't know, I can't do it, if you did it, I still can't do it. Please, after this program, I'm going to believe that you all can do it. So what documents did I find in these archives? We're going to start with the details, and then we're going to go to the larger picture. Okay. Yeah. No, you were going the there we go. Up.
Going up.
There we go. This is my assistant, who's been my assistant from the beginning, my husband Stanley, who's been a great support all the way through, and I'm sure some of you have met him already. This is the family register, and in the area of Württemberg, and hopefully in other places, you will find it in this format. Unfortunately, in Baden, they decided to write it out longhand. In Bavaria, they wrote it out longhand in paragraph form in illegible handwriting most of the time. But this is a very good one for you to see the setup of the family registers. These family registers are available at the state archives. Some of them are available on the Mormon microfilms that you can check on the internet at our Jewish Gen site to see what's available. And a few of them are still on microfiche at the archives for the Central Archives for the Jewish People in Jerusalem. Each head of family has a separate page. So Can you do it a little bit better? I think that's a hard one. Okay. What we have is a format of the columns, and this is the important. Okay. On this side, I'm just going to keep going. On this side, you have the date of birth of the father. Oh, I'm sorry. I just wanted to mention that the handout I gave you will help you with the names of the documents. The names of the documents with a German and an explanation is also in your syllabus that is on CD. If any of you don't have the handout, it's right in the back. Okay. And I just have these because when I realized the syllabus, oops, I hope I have enough. Okay. When I realized the syllabus was not hard copy, I just happened to have them with me. So, on the first column, you have the date of birth of the father. Then you have the house father, or the head of the family. In the middle column, you have the date of the marriage. On this column, you have the name of the mother and her date of birth. Now, often under the dates of birth, you will have nothing, which means they were born locally. You will have the word here, which, believe me, took me a long time to realize was not a place. And then you will also find a name of a place. And of course, if you have that information, then you can go to the other family registers for that place. Below that, you have the names of the parents, which will give you, of course, another generation back. And if they have a different place, you can follow that. Below that, you have the children, their names, when they were born, sometimes when they called it confirmation, but with the date of the bar mitzvah, and then when they got married, and sometimes when they died.
This is called a
Jewish, well, a family register. They had them for the Christians and for the Jews. Do you have the handout yet?
the blue one?
Yeah, good. Okay. Each of these family register volumes had an index at the end, which would list the last names and the first names. The problem is that they did not list the wives' names. So inevitably, you will be going page by page to get that information. Can you bring it up towards you? Towards you. More towards you. No, towards you. More. Okay. And you can see here under G, we have a name and the first name and the page that is on. Okay. At the top, these are the numbers, and I don't want to stress them too much because unfortunately the Stuttgart Archive has made a list that does not correspond with these numbers. So you want to have the name of the town or village and the number that you think it is, and then you will have to find an adapting number. So keep a little cheat sheet so you know which way they correspond. Okay? In some places, they also had a birth register. I found, actually, for my family, that 64 pages of the family register I needed were no longer there. I don't know if it was for Nick. Yeah, go ahead.
How often did they take these family registers?
Okay, these family registers were started in 1810, and they just moved onwards, and they would really basically copy the volumes when they got full, or they'd have the old and the new. So for a village like Mergen, who had so many Jews, there were lots of volumes that you would have to look in.
And they're dated?
Well, it's as they filled them in, you know. So an earlier family would be an earlier volume, but then you would also find later volumes. Okay, it's an ongoing process. Here in the family register, the birth register, you would look under the year of birth, and since you don't know the children's names, often you would just look for the parents' names. And you can see how you can do this if you don't speak German. We haven't learned a word of German. We're just looking for our family names. Other places to find birth information are in the apprenticeship records and the immigration records that we'll talk about a little later. Yeah, that's correct. Okay. All births were listed, even those were out of wedlock or if the child died in childbirth and was unnamed. For an out-of-wedlock child, they use the word spurious from Latin, being out of wedlock or illegitimate. And also, on the family records, they would also note if the child was illegitimate. Here we have child number 10. Again, I don't have to read it, but child number 10, and then from child number 10 we had another child, and you can tell by the dates that it was her child. and there was no father listed. But I did track that father down, and I'm going to get him because I found some other documents.
But wouldn't the previous children also then have been illegitimate?
No. This is the child. This is like the grandchild of the head of the household. Okay? Okay. Excuse me. Stan, I don't know why you're holding on to the focus. There you go. Okay, and up. This is the Murrigan Village Cemetery, which is just beautiful. Up, more towards you. More towards you. More. Go it up more. There we go. Which is absolutely beautiful. And finally, the documentation is done. And if anybody's interested in it, please let me know because I'm going to help sell it here. 850 headstones dot this hillside, and it's really beautiful. If you ever are traveling around Germany looking for your own ancestors, please come and visit the cemetery because it's absolutely beautiful. But it's difficult to get this death information. As you can see, the cemetery is not in the greatest shape. But also, there are other ways to find it. As you see in the family registers, there was no column for death. There was death for the children, but not a death information for the parents. But sometimes people jotted it down with the date and sometimes the place if it was not locally. And then the other place you can find is in the civil records. In the village archive, they kept track of everybody who passed away. And this is called, delicately, the corpse list. And on this list, they would list everybody and what they died of. Now, I found this information was not accurate at all, but if it's where you need to start from, it helps. Because, for instance, Joseph David, who was in the portrait, is listed here as Jacob, but I knew there was no other. And his date of years he was living was also incorrect. But I loved what they said he died of. He died at age, actually, 94, and they said he died of weakness of age, and I like that. But other diseases you'll see are sugar disease, which is diabetes, and paralysis. That seems to be a very common one. Lung disease, and basically old age.
What is this called in German?
It's on your thing. It's under Leich. Turn it over. Yeah, Leichen Register. Yes. Well, it's sometimes I had paralysis of the head, which probably was a stroke, wouldn't you think? And there are lists of those diseases, I believe, on the JIRSIG site. Somebody has put that information in of all the different diseases. Many local communities or individuals, or now the state government, have taken on the project of cemetery documentation. This is in Baden-Württemberg, and they've done an excellent job. In Bavaria, it's not being done, and I would say if you have your ancestors in Bavaria, I would go to the topmost levels to say, please, we need to get these cemeteries documented. I have visited enough in Bavaria to know that they're in terrible shape, but maybe we can lobby somehow that they make the effort to do it. But now at least they have done most of the documentation in some of the areas. And here you can see how it is done. They take the information off the headstone. They take the photographs in wintertime because then they don't have the shadows, of course, early in the morning with a digital camera, so they get some wonderful photographs. And then they also, as well as using the inscription, they also go back to those family registers and put more information in. So that's the first place to start, and often they're typed up. So they're very easy for us to read, and that would be a good place for you to start. These are called the cemetery documentation. And when you go into the village hall or the town hall, ask, do you have the cemetery documentation? Sometimes it's an unpublished manuscript. And they just don't think. You have to do the thinking for them, which is why you take the list that's either on your CD syllabus or this list and say, this is what I'm looking for. Because they haven't done the research. They've never looked in their archives. I'm not talking, because you usually don't have an archivist in these little places. So you say, do you have the cemetery documentation? And they will drag it out, and then you can just look at it. Yes?
In Heidelberg, there is an only set.
Right. And they keep on doing more and more. And that information actually, I'm not going to internet sources here because I know you guys can do it all by yourself. But yes, you can get the complete set in Heidelberg and actually in different archives and the state archive too.
Complete set of what?
The cemetery documentation. Yes, but well, because this is a state project. There's a state project. And actually, if you come up to me afterwards or in the vendors area, I can give you the name of the person who I know personally who's doing it, who's used my material actually to talk about the Berlitz family. And I did want to mention that I've given a lot of you names of people. Always when you write people, if someone's given you the name, use that person's name. Say, you know, Emily Rose told me to write you, because that makes everybody feel good. Okay, go ahead. Last question, then I want to keep going and we'll save the questions. Go ahead.
I mentioned yesterday, I was in Stuttgart in November. I have a complete catalog of the 60,000 sheets that are in, Jewish sheets that are in the Stuttgart archive.
For the cemetery or for the family registers?
For the registers.
For the family registers.
60,000 Jewish sheets.
Okay.
What about in the little town?
Okay, now we're getting off subject, so let me keep going and then save the questions, and I have planned that there should be plenty of time for questions afterwards. Great. Well, as we all know, gathering information about the times before the 18th century is very difficult. And this is where the research that the archivists and the historians had done... Stan, you got to bring it towards you. Way up, way up. Forget the border. Go further up. This is where the research that has been done by the archivists and historians over many years is very useful to us. And don't be shy. We want to use the research that has been done. This is just an example of one of the books. This is written by a former director of the Ludwigsburg State Archive. And his area of expertise was the area east of Stuttgart around Schwäbisch Hall, where many of us have ancestors. And he went to the castle where the archives were held by this certain prince. He took 10 summers doing it. And I said, oh, great, I want to go too, I want to go too. And he said, forget it. You know, they're never going to let you in, and it's a complete mess. You don't have enough years in your life to do it. So that's why his information, like this tax list that I'm going to show you here, is very useful. Because we have to realize we're only going to get back so far, and we just need to find what we can find. And so this is a typical tax list, and you can see the word Jew after everybody's name, which helps identifying people. But you can find some old documents in the archives, and this is where hard work and just asking questions helps. This is a typical tax list. This is from 1766. Again, Stan, bring it towards you on everyone. There you go. And this was found in the village archive, and all the documents I'm talking about are in the village archives. Okay? And this one shows my ancestor, Löw Katz. And on the family register, I didn't know where my ancestor was from, but here it said Nikolsburg. And I looked up, and that is actually a town with a large Jewish ghetto in Moravia. I didn't know that before. And then on the next one, on the same document, it had, you've got to move this way up so we can see the red that's underlined. Keep going, way up. We can see a Moses David. And it said he was from Mark Berolzheim. Well, again, the family register hadn't given me that information, but because the name was Berolzheimer, we figured we had a good shot at coming from Mark Berolzheim, and this was the confirmation of my theory. Now, I should say, for those of you who read my book carefully, as this information is not in my book, because after my book was finished, a historian looking in 20th century documents just found these 2 pages stuck randomly in the village archive. But, you know, as we know, research is an ongoing process, so I'm sharing it with you, but it's not in the book. The history of the 18th and 19th century leads us to include several other areas of genealogical research: surname adoption and immigration. These information can be traced through the documents located in the local, county, and state archives. Here we have a name adoption list, and this was done in the 1820s, as we know, through Baden and through Württemberg area. It depends on the state where it was done in general. And what they had to do is, for instance, Joseph David Berolzheimer had his name, and he kept his surname, so he just had to confirm that that was his name. But here you see someone who signed in Hebrew because he did not write in German, confirming that that was his name. Actually, someone was just talking about the Schweitzers, but anyway, here's a Schweitzer name. And so this is very useful to find out if we don't know someone's surname. But an easier way is that these lists were published in the local newspaper. So guess what? We can read this writing, can't we? And go up, please. And you can see how they had the name and then the name that was adopted. Now, in my book, I talk a lot about name adoption. It's not part of the program here, but what I wanted to say is you can trace this. Now, in some places, these name adoption lists are in the Mormon LDDS microfilms. I don't know why. They seem to be stuck at the end of different films. They were probably just going through microfilming, and they were there. So it's definitely worth looking there because I have found some name adoption lists in random places.
I'm sorry, what was that, a newspaper?
That was just the newspaper, the local Gazette.
So you have to go through...
Well, you know you're looking in the 1820s, and you just look in the 1820s, and it's such an obvious list, you don't have to read the whole newspaper again. You're looking for a list.
Okay, and that's the local?
The local newspaper. Well, these little places didn't have their own newspaper. It probably would be the county that would have the newspaper in that respect. Okay?
Thank you.
Okay, emigration. Unlike most researchers, I began my research in Germany, so I actually found the original documents before I learned how you do the research that you all have learned about here. In the family registers, in the remarks column, they would often write, to America, to America, to America, to America, to America, and to America. They don't often put the dates, but once in a while they will put a year, which is helpful. But this tells you that you have to go and find the documents elsewhere. County and villages also kept a register because actually when people left, they were taking with them assets. They were taking the young people, and they also were taking financial assets with them. So they wanted to keep track of who was leaving town. And so you would find, and this is useful for the women, when they left for marriage, they would list them as well, or if someone was a teacher and left town. So these documents, you would look and you'd see this one went to Baden for marriage, this one went to North America, this went to North America. Again, you're only looking for the names you're looking for. You don't care about anybody else. You're just focusing on the names. The emigration applications, actually you can find most of them in the LDS microfilms because they were chronological. They didn't care about the religion. So they were microfilming the Christians, they microfilmed the Jews, they microfilmed everybody. So you can do those, most of them here in America. And these documents tell you a lot of information because sometimes you might not have known that the father had passed away, or exactly date of birth, or who was a guarantor, who was usually a relative. Sometimes they put how much assets they took with them, and that is all useful information. Most of them are not nice printed documents like this one, but it's easy to see how it's set up. They're set up the same way. You're only looking for the names you're looking for. Another source that again is easier to look at, but unfortunately some of these gazettes are not in good shape, is the local newspaper. Again, you can see a Berlesheimer, who was single, from Murrigan, left in 1854. Now these lists are really great because you can see who else left at the same time. Cousins, friends, other people from the same community, and this is helpful for your research. So I have actually gone back to these lists over and over again to see who left the same time. Then you check the boat records, but you all know how to do that, and see if they came over at the same time on the same boat. Another source for immigration information are the curator and debt registers. Now this is a type of thing that takes a while to go through, but they are in the local archives. Again, Christian and Jewish is mixed together, and if someone was owed money for a house sale or someone passed away, it was recorded in there because they had to track down that person until they accepted the money or said they didn't want the money. So they would say that, for instance, they're in America and we're trying to reach them. And then sometimes they would put, and this is a gold mine, again these are just slips of paper. Can you bring it up please? Thank you. This I found in the debt and curator lists. I had no idea where one of my ancestors had gone to, and here he had to have a certified copy saying I don't want the money, and it said he was from the city of Davenport, Iowa. I didn't know that. I knew he had left, I had lost him, and so that's how I found him. These sources are also very important for tracing our maternal and female lines. Moses Katz has passed away, and his son asked in for the town for permission for his sister to emigrate for marriage. And when he did that, he put the name of the town she was going to. I never would have known it otherwise. And that took a lot of time to go through, but as I was going through all the community registers, we will discuss that in a second, I was able to find it. I then went to the state archive, found her information about her family, and actually she married a school teacher, which is not a great match, but that's what she got. And then I was able to go to that village and find her headstone. An example of early migration, because as we know, the Jews were not allowed to go from city to city freely until basically the 1850s and 1860s, happened just quite by chance. I was sitting outside the village hall one day with Hans-Peter Muller, who was a local historian who helped me the first few times to figure out the local archive. And we were sitting outside the village hall because Murrigan no longer has a restaurant, no longer has a bakery, no longer has a butcher. So I would bring some sandwiches and a couple of beers, and we would sit outside, and he would translate documents for me. And we were looking at this house insurance register. Who cares? But we were looking at it. And in the remarks column, again, we're just looking for names, it said that Joseph David Berlesheimer took over the house that was owned by Moses Katz living in Rottweil. I had never heard of Rottweil. Hans Peter had no idea that one of the people from Murrigan had done business in Rottweil. Who knew? And who would think of looking in the remarks column? But again, just looking for names, you'd say, wait a second, I see names that I recognize, I want to know what's in there. Just as I did not know the basic genealogical information about my family, I really didn't know anything about their occupation, civil status, or contributions they made to society. These are my cousins. Move way up, way up, way up, way up. Now in their 90s, and move it way up so I can see it when they were younger. All the way up. Keep going. Yeah. And this is them as children living in Murrigan in, well, one's 95 and one's 92, so you can do the calculation. And you can see that she has her best doll with her. Of course, I interviewed all the elderly cousins that I basically found because I didn't know them before. And I have on my website a model family interview and also a questionnaire that you can use for foods. And these are all free downloads on my website that you can just use as a model and go from there. But I found that these cousins didn't know about the times before their grandparents, before the end, basically, of the 19th century. So again, we have to go to the archives to see what we can find. Let me share with you a couple of logistical points that are not in my syllabus, which is on your CD, so you can't read it. You will probably be on your own in these smaller local village archives. So you have to plan to use the list that you will have in your hand and go from there. But every time you take a volume, and honestly, this has just been reorganized to look this good, so don't assume it's going to look as organized as this. But when you take out a volume, put in a piece of paper, a long strip of paper, and describe the volume. For instance, for this one, I would write, because again, we don't read German, I would write brown cover, brown cover with a torn white front. So I would know to put this back in that certain place, because you don't want to leave it in the mess for the next person, and you also don't want to leave it in a mess for yourself if you want to go back the same trip and find something. Also, you have to realize that the German using the archive had months, even years, to do their research. So they would copy everything longhand, or now some of them have laptops. So the problem is photocopying, because you want to get the documents photocopied as fast as you can so you can find somebody in German to look at them to know if you want to find something else. Now, the Stuttgart State Archive is really bad. They take weeks. We're talking weeks to get you the photocopies.
So sometimes, if I was desperate, I would pay their ridiculous surcharge, and it would take a few days. I would go and beg politely and say, I'm only here for this amount of time, please. You always have to be, of course, overly polite, but the point is that depends on the archive. So I would ask the first thing I go in, how long will it take to get the photocopies, and explain your situation. Because although I've been doing these talks for a couple of years, and I haven't heard of anybody going and doing the research. So it's not as if they're overwhelmed with people doing research. So it's not an imposition. Perhaps they will accommodate you. Some state archives, you get it the same day and you're happy. It just depends. And of course you should check to see if you can use a handheld scanner or a digital camera. I did check with the Stuttgart State Library a few months ago, and they said no. I think the village archives, I don't know if they would even care. So it's definitely worth checking that type of thing by email. And always give a little background, who you are, and then ask the question. So let's go on to the bigger questions of my ancestors and your ancestors' lives. Let's start with the occupations. There are many places to find out what your ancestors did. The first and easiest one is the family register. Again, there was no column for that information, but sometimes they just made a notation. So for instance, here, tradesman, that's a good one, you're going to learn that. But again, you're just looking for your family name, and then at home, you can find out what he did. And this one, my favorite occupation, is a soap boiler, which probably was not a happy occupation. Soap boiler. But there are many other places to find this information. Up, please. Thank you. In the local archives, they had trade tax books. As we well know, the Germans loved to keep records of everything. So we have from the early 19th century and even the 18th century the taxes that everybody paid. And this would be the cover. And, certain words you're going to learn and recognize them just by their shape. And this is the word for trade, Gewerbe. Okay, go ahead. And you don't have to be able to pronounce them. You just have to be able to read them. Okay, further up? No, up. And then they would have the name of the person. Again, that's all you're looking for. And sometimes, obviously, the spelling is not exactly how you know it. And then it would list the occupation and how much trade tax they paid. There are so many registers. There are trade registers, there are house registers, there are tax registers, there are land registers. So you have to go through them all. Now, most of these registers have a special section for the Jews, which helps us. You find any Jewish name and you look before it and after it. Okay? Sometimes they're just chronological, but very often the Jews were in a special section. Other places to find information about the occupations, up please, are the apprenticeship records. And these apprenticeship records, every boy when he reached the age of 13 had to list of what he was going to learn. And of course they listed what the father's occupation was. And then they would have what he is going to learn. They also have the date of birth. And this information is great because if you wanted to, actually you haven't done the registers of somebody, I actually photocopied all these apprenticeship records because I always found information in them. Okay? The central government also liked keeping statistical information. So basically back in the 1820s, 1819, they decided to do a survey of every man over 14. And so they basically listed the person's name and what they did and what their occupation was. Again, we're only looking for the names. I won't tell you the number of lists that I photocopied, which were a list of that they signed another list. Because I just found family names. I didn't know what the lists were. I photocopied them. I got them home and I found out they were nothing. But then again, it was a list of who was in the village. So, there was a benefit to everything. But the idea is you just photocopy and then you find out. And then they would do long remarks about certain people, which again, you're not going to read when you're in Germany, but you can find that information when you're home.
What did you find in the comments?
Well, in the comments, it was a long story because Moses Katz had gone bankrupt. And so they had the long thing about how he was bankrupt and that he really didn't have a trade because he was bankrupt. And I knew he was bankrupt, but perhaps I would not have known that. And then I'd have to go back and follow that information too. Some people have in their personal possessions the master letter that they got when they become a master in their trade. Sometimes you can also find these in the citizenship applications. In this one, he became a shoemaker, and you can see it's a master letter. And this is, of course, information that's nice to have because you have to assume that most people went through the process and became masters in their trade.
And where would you find that?
Either in the citizenship records, those are sort of random, in people's papers, people just give them to you, whatever. Something that does take a long time, but I found really interesting, was going through the local newspapers. I knew that Moses Katz, for instance, had a store. And so, in the other places, finding in the newspapers and in contracts, they would put the person's occupation as part of their title. That's very German. Farmer so-and-so, we have innkeeper so-and-so. And that is just a way to do it, or they would put the name and then they would put with trade. Of course, we're talking many hours of research to find these things. This is sort of lower down. If you have lots of time, like I did, you can go and find these little references to the occupations. As I was saying, looking through the newspapers is time-consuming, but you can find some great stuff. Here, this is an advertisement from Moses Katz for his store. And he wrote that he had calicos and cashmeres and cottons. Again, I'm just looking for his name, Moses Katz. But what's interesting, because here it said that he went to the Frankfurt seasonal markets. Well, Rottweil to Frankfurt is a good 4 hours driving on the Autobahn today. So you can imagine it took several weeks to do that process. And they always said that they always gave the best prices and gave nice service. But of course, everybody said that. But it was a nice touch to find in the advertisements. So, we all want to know about the houses that our ancestors lived in or owned. And this information actually you can get back quite far into the 18th century. Now, in the local archives, the conditions of the archives are usually terrible. They're very humid. The documents are being basically eaten by insects as we're talking. I thought I should Xerox, and that's how I got started on the whole book idea. It was photocopy as much as I could, just to preserve these documents someplace else. And here you see the house information from 1766. Again, the word Jew helps us. Jew in front of every name helps us identify the Jewish people. But then as they were crossed out, usually the houses were sold to the sons. And so that was an interesting way for genealogical information because, as we well know, cousins, whatever, had the same names, but usually they sold to the son, and that's the way you could follow it. I knew that my ancestor Moses Katz had bought 2 apartments in 1788. I found that in the contracts book. And then in 1796, he bought this house. We're talking 1796. He bought this house that is right next to the Adler Inn that was owned by the Baron. This was a prime location in the middle of the village. And then in 1912, some of Moses Katz's descendants came. You want to move it up? Yeah. Up. 1912. You can see 1912 here. Took a picture of the house. And here I took a picture of the house. Looks exactly the same, doesn't it? And I like things in research and books to come full circle. And I recently received an email from the mayor of the village. And through my research, which is another subject, we have learned that the founder of the Berlitz School of Languages was born in Murigen, and it was a Berlesheimer. And we believe he could have been born in this house, but then again, they could have rented another house when they were in Murigen, because everybody didn't live in the same house. But the mayor wrote me because the house is for sale, and he wanted to know if I wanted to buy it to make a museum to Mr. Berlitz. Well, if you read on my website the whole story of Mr. Berlitz, you will understand my ambivalence about taking on this project. But maybe we can talk to Arthur Obermeyer. We can all get money together and buy the Berlitz house. I found in the contracts book, and get it way up, in 1796, I don't read Hebrew, sorry, so I couldn't read his signature here, but up here we can see Moses Katz. Again, I was just looking for his name. I couldn't read anything else. And this is the contract when he bought the house. Now, it sounds really easy. Look at the index, you're done. Unfortunately, they usually just listed the sellers. So that meant you had to still go through page by page looking for the names of the people. In the contracts book, they list the number of ovens in the house, the number of floors, exact detail. So you can really see, and sometimes you can find old pictures like I did that really will tell you more about what the house looked like. I must admit, I got very tired of the comments column because it said 3 ovens, da-da-da-da-da. But then, if I hadn't read the comments column, I wouldn't have known that Moses Katz went to Rottweil. So keep on reading about the ovens because you never know what else you're going to find. Well, we're very interested in the civil status of our ancestors. Feudal lords like Baron von Munch that we see here allowed certain Jews to live in their feudal domains. And for this, they got a protection letter that we have all read about. And they were often given a physical letter, which actually is not very aesthetically interesting. But here is a group one. Can you bring it up? Yeah. Which had many seals on it. And this is in the Göppingen Jewish Museum. And actually, it's a group protection letter. And it had several people signing it here. Sometimes people still kept those protection letters in their personal documents. I have found applications, but actually for my own family, I haven't found any protection letters. Well, it's not surprising that being a citizen was very important. But what we don't realize, it was because of the communal rights that people got when they were citizens. And by communal rights, I mean getting a cheaper price for firewood, or being able to graze your cattle on the communal lands. So this was a nuts and bolts in your pocket benefit, of course, of being a citizen, and also you had more prestige. Marx Berlesheimer, one of the ancestors, was actually the first Jewish citizen of Murigen in 1835. Now, most Christians became citizens because they were born in the village, but the Jews had to apply. So in many places you can find these long applications for citizenship, and that's where you'll find other documents like what I was saying, the master letter. So they had to prove why they should become citizens. Well, skipping way ahead in terms of the history, in the 1850s, Jews were allowed to vote in the local elections. And to my surprise, the Jews immediately were elected to some of the village councils, which you can imagine was quite a plum job. Now, I've tried to figure out from the voting records, which I found in the village information, how many Christians might have voted for the Jews, and I did all this extrapolations, and it was so confusing because how many people voted compared to the votes, and how many people they were allowed to vote for. Were they allowed to vote for 2, 3, or 4? I've tried talking to every mathematician I could talk to figure out if there was any system to analyze this. So I really don't know. But the point is that in the 1850s, you can also find people listed, and you see they're all Christians, and then we have David Goodwillfinger to these local community councils. Financial status. We all want to know, were they wealthy? Were they poor? And that information is in the archives. Of course, the list of taxpayers that I showed you works. The apprenticeship records also say if the father had any assets, if he was poor, if he was rich. And then we have the marriage arrangements. These were not the ketubah that we're used to seeing. These are financial arrangements. And after 1811, these had to be registered for Christians and Jews in the village archives. And so this is the cover, and it would have a little contract number. These were organized chronological order, Christians and Jews. So if you had from the family register the date of the marriage, you could go and look for that year. And most of the archives are trying to get those lists organized. In these, you will find incredible information in these quote-unquote, which I will call contracts. First of all, they had to list what the husband and what the wife brought to the marriage. And here we have what the man brings. And again, you don't even have to speak any German for this. You saw he brought nothing of something, and then he brought 2,500. The odds are that was the amount of money they brought. Again, no German is needed to figure this out. And then they listed every item. We're talking down to the private, intimate items one brings to a wedding, listed. And some of them, Again, you don't even have to know what the money means. You can see it's not even one of them. You know, it's like sense of. And here, it's all the things that they were listed. And for this person, she brought a silver belt buckle, she brought a little prayer book that was silver plated, and she brought some nice clothes. So obviously, she had some money that she was coming into the marriage with. But unfortunately, some of the marriages, they literally came in with a shirt on their back, and they listed one shirt. And you could see how much they were done. And it was very interesting because then you'll see in those marriage contracts if the parents could write German, tons of information. If the father or mother had passed away, you could learn that information as well. So I was able to learn about Gustel Katz. Can you bring it up so everybody can see her? As you can see, her eyes. Actually, growing up, I actually never noticed her eyes because they were very shiny portraits. And I actually never focused until I looked at these portraits and I said, oh my gosh. Well, I couldn't figure it out. I actually showed it to ophthalmologists who said, I don't know, lady, you know, I'm doing your eye test. I found out in the contracts from her son's marriages in the 1830s that she was blind. And you can see it in the documents exactly. Again, I'm just looking at the names, and then I found out later that it said up Linden, and that her face had been robbed. This was in the 1830s. She lived till 1861 in the same house. Okay. These types of documents enabled me also to piece together why my ancestors, my great-grandfather Meyer, emigrated to America in 1857. I used the debt registers. I used the house registers because they had to sell the house. They went bankrupt. And so in the newspaper, the father had died, they went in the newspaper and they had to list that they had to sell all their goods. So this is the broader picture you can find using all these sources. Thus far, I've only talked about what's available in the village archives, but the same type of basic information can be found in the city or town archives. So all I was saying, you would also say, do you have, when you go to the city or town archives. But as I learned when I did my research about Moses Katz, because these governments had bigger bureaucracies, they had more stuff they wrote down. So in the villages, they really didn't do the community council minute books very seriously. In fact, in some places, they didn't begin until the 1860s. But in a place like Rottweil, which you can see here, bring it up, which you can see here in the 1850s was a very substantial town, a Catholic town, they had huge minute books because everything they said was very important to them. So that gives another place that you can look for information that is not available in the village archives. Dr. Hecht, who I met at the beginning of my research when I wandered into Rottweil saying, hey, I'm Moses Katz's descendant, and he was very sweet and gave me a tour. This is the, can you bring it up, please? Way up. This is the Jews' Lane, and in the Middle Ages, there was quite a large Jewish community of 200 Jews living among the Christians in the Jews' Lane in Rottweil. But with the Black Plague, they were either forced to leave or were massacred. And no Jews had been allowed to live in that town since the Middle Ages. But once I knew that Moses had done research there, had done business there, I knew that I had to start doing research there. And I started actually with the information back in the 1780s. These community council books have indexes. Sounds great, sounds easy. You look under the last name, you're done. Not. You can see here M, Moses Katz. Also, you have to look under J for Jew. Later on, I for Israelite. Because, you know, when you're doing indexing, you just throw it wherever you want to throw it. And so you have to look under all those things. Also, you should look under, once you learn the other Jewish families that lived in a place, look under those names, because they might have only indexed one name. So it's time-consuming, a little back-breaking, but it's fun. The transactions regarding Moses Katz were documented in the minute book. So Dr. Hecht had written about Moses because he was very important to the town at the end of the 18th century. He was one of the few Jews who rose from peddler to trader to military purveyor and moneylender to the town. I spent days going through these community council books and I found where he gave huge loans to the town. But he had also written that Moses Katz had actually saved the town from Napoleon, and I couldn't find this reference. I was looking for Napoleon, the wars, whatever. And one day, I just literally plopped a huge volume down on the table, and I said, I give up, and it opened to this contract. And this contract tells the story of when Moses Katz literally saved the town because Napoleon's army threatened to ransack because they wanted money and not grains and horses and cows. And so they needed money. So they turned to Moses Katz, as they say in the document, because he was fair and honest and also gave the best price. So here we have, again, all I had to know was Moses Katz. And again, the name's not spelled as I was used to, but I certainly could recognize it. And it says that he bought the gold and the silver. And then I also saw in the contract that he signed his name in Hebrew. Oops, way up so everybody can see that. Which I came to recognize, and there weren't very many documents signed in Hebrew. So it was not a stretch for that. This event was chosen by the publisher of the German edition of my book that was translated from the English as the title of the book, which is, can you move it up? When Moses Katz Saved His Town from Napoleon. And it was interesting because one of the archivists said to me, you know, I just don't like the title of the book. And then I told him how many books I had sold, and he said, oh, well, maybe I'm wrong. So it was a very, usually these books are, something very academic. And the fact that they tried to make it warm it up, the archivist, didn't like, but the public did, so that was very good. Often transactions, and this you might turn over that sheet that I gave you to see the diagram. We see the various arrows. Often transactions or proceedings initiated at the local level, went to the county level, went to the regional level, went to the state level, were decided, came back down to the regional level, came back down to the county level, came back down to the local level, and then to the person. What you want to do is photocopy everything in one archive. You go to the other archive and photocopy, and then when you get home, you can put it in chronological order and fill in what you were missing. And sometimes the handwriting is really bad in one document, and they repeat the prior document verbatim in the next document where you can read the darn writing. So you want to photocopy, and it might seem redundant, but you'll eventually figure it out. History books were so important for me. First year, I bought all the books or photocopied all the books that told the story of the area I was researching. And then I used the interlibrary loan system. Believe me, they cannot read the titles. They still say, I've got a book for you, and I cannot read the title. And I said, fine, I'll be over to get it. But you can get citations from magazine articles, and you can get magazine articles Xeroxed and sent to you. You can do a ton of research here. What happened, though, is the earlier books and articles, they moved the archives around. So the citations no longer worked. But at least I knew that the document was out there. And so I would keep on looking. This is the way almost all of the documents at the state level were organized. And this is, you will see how easy it is to find the information you're looking for. Ignore everything here. You're only looking here. And you're only looking for a name. Moses Katz. Done, Xerox, take home, figure out. It's that easy. Then you'll learn that it's the Ministry of Interior, which really did everything regarding to the Jews. And then you will see the date. That's all you need. When you get home, you'll find out what's in the documents. These techniques worked for researching events on all levels that related really more than just a family, that related more than just a village, that related more to communal events or events that happened in history at the time. So let me just share two of them with you. The first one involved Moses Katz. In 1803, Moses got permission to be the first Jew to live in Rottweil since the Middle Ages. In the town minute book, I found that he bought at auction one of the oldest houses, and still standing, right near the town hall. Well, you can imagine the community did not like that, and they said, there's no way no Jew is allowed to own a house in Rottweil. So they postponed the contract ratification, and they asked for an opinion from the superior highest court. This is at the local level. At the state level, I found the decision of the court, which took 42 pages to say that once a Jew had permission to do business in a location, they had the right to own a place to do that business. So he had the right, again, here we have Moses Katz, so I knew I had the right thing. He had the right to own the house. And so, actually, in 1806, he brought his family from Murrigan to live, and that was where his store was located. The store is still located there, and I found that the Jewish community worshipped on the 3rd floor in that building for decades. And when I went there, of course, I went and investigated in the building, but of course I didn't find any remnants of the community there. I also found, to my great surprise, that my 3-great-grandfather, Joseph David Berlesheimer, was very important in events that took place in the 19th century. I found in the trade register that he was the highest trade taxpayer of all the Christians and Jews. Here's his name, trade, and what he did. You can see, 38. So you check all the other pages, and nobody was as high as 38. I also found in several registers that he was listed with the title of Parnas, which is often spelled with a B or a P, and sometimes ES, sometimes AS, which meant that he was the president of the local Jewish community, which I should have been able to figure out because at that time he was the wealthiest Jewish person in the community. And then, in those books that I Xeroxed, I saw in 1922 that he was listed as a signatory on the early, did I say 1827, I'm sorry, from the book from 1922, that in 1827 and 1828, he was a signatory on the petitions that the Jews sent pushing for their own emancipation. Well, this is one of those documents that wasn't where it was supposed to be. And literally, in the state archives, you have piles of documents literally this high. You have to stand up to do them. And they have to have special knots, and they have to be lined up, and that is the most important thing to the people who work in the archives. But going through, I finally found it. Berlesheimer and Berlesheimer. And so I found that he was really important to the history of the Jews. And so we returned to the portraits. I learned about Joseph David Berlesheimer and Gustl Katz, their families, their villages, their communities, their history. I certainly could not have included in this talk all the documents. I found over 2,600 documents, some of them just a line, but some of them many pages. And I looked at 1,600 sources. Now, these sources I've listed on my website in my free download of my bibliography, and I encourage you all to either look at it or download it or especially use it. There's also a special section called A Blueprint for Researchers, which goes into more detail than what you'll find in your syllabus as well. I want to encourage you to go do it. There's no reason not to. You have to save enough time. Send your family somewhere else. You cannot go in an afternoon. The archives are probably closed. The village hall's closed, and say you want to do it in a minute. It can't be done. I also wanted to mention that I have put on my website a list of the Jewish teachers. And even if you're not in the specific Württemberg-Baden area, it's worth checking because teachers went across borders to teach, and that also has genealogical information. If you think of more questions, I'm going to be in my vendor's booth, and I'll be glad to answer them and help you any way I can. I'm going to be going to Germany talking about Moses Katz and Maximilian Berlitz. And also this year, I'm going to be teaching an online course at myfamily.com, which is part of Ancestry.com. And I'll probably put one mention on Jersey, so you'll find out about it. But then, you can always contact me by email. You have my email address on all the information I have. So thank you very much. I hope I woke you up. I hope I gave you encouragement to get going.